So, a very exciting day today as we explore the world of art and its status as work and its relationship to Jesus' teaching on work. We'll start with a brief meditation on a little passage from Matthew, which I trust will be very familiar to you all, and might as well read the entire paragraph, I suppose. So we'll be looking at verses 25 down to 33. Now, of course, the main point of this paragraph is not being anxious, but trusting God who takes care of the world. But the kind of subsidiary point that I want to focus in on here is consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, which is, again, the main thrust by way of a comparison. But it says, yet, I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. And it's very fortuitous that our topic is art today, because beauty in the Bible does tend to kind of hide at the level of the assumptions of the authors rather than become an independent object of interest. Right? Do you see what I'm saying? That Jesus affirms as clearly as he could the beauty of the world, but only seldom in the Psalms does it really emerge as a central focus. And yet it's the assumption of Jesus' statements here. Furthermore, the word beauty per se doesn't particularly show up very often in the Bible, but what does show up a lot is the word glory. And I think we can make a pretty good argument, and we could draw some very powerful witnesses to bear on the idea that the glory of the Lord is intimately related to and maybe even in some sense identical with his beauty. And so when he is showing his glory in the world, he does it by way of showing his beauty. So the world is beautiful, and therefore God made it beautiful since he makes everything. And therefore, when we make beautiful things or do beautiful things, even if they have no apparent productive capability or no reason for being that serves some other purpose, it's valid for those works of art to just exist for themselves, because God has created the cosmos not only in a bare utilitarian sense to function, he creates it as much as anything just to be beautiful. The Shakespeare of biblical beauty quotes is a guy named Sergei Bulgakov, who I want to very briefly introduce you to you here before we call our artists up. He was a Russian Orthodox theologian from the early part of the 20th century, and his whole theology in many ways is shaped both by an appreciation of God's beauty, the beauty of the world, and then art's ability to, in some sense, capture that. He says in one of his books, God is revealed to man not only as the wisdom of the world, but also as its beauty. Right? So when we had our engineers, we're thinking the functionality, the wisdom, and all those wonderful things, but it's also the beauty of the world that's captured by art. This means, first of all, that beauty experienced by man is not only a subjective human feeling, which is kind of the typical way people think about it now. Well, you think it's beautiful, somebody else thinks it's ugly, it's all just up for grabs. Bulgakov disagrees. He says, it's not a subjective human feeling which can perhaps claim to exist only as a fashion of the moment. Beauty is an objective principle in the world revealing to us the divine glory. And this is that connection of beauty and glory, which I think is interwoven subtly in the scriptures, but which thinkers like Bulgakov help to tease out. Now, of course, because we live in a fallen world, though, this experience of beauty, like everything else, is a bittersweet one. And in one of his real money quotes on this, he talks about the pain of experiencing the beauty of Eden, as he's going to call it, in a non-Eden place, and the way this just rips you apart. And this is just such a great quote. He says, Edenic beauty in non-Eden, in the kingdom of the prince of this world, drawing on imagery from biblical apocalyptic, is to a certain degree theft and forgery, and thus it bites like a snake and ruins with its sweet poison. The adulterous woman, that's from Book of Revelation, clothed in satanic beauty, opposes the woman clothed in the sun. Both of them compete and agonizingly struggle. You see, only a Russian could write this stuff. In the souls of men and women who have lost Eden, but have not forgotten it and always pine for it. Languor on account of beauty, the torment of beauty, is the howl of the whole universe. Right? This is clearly a guy who's read his Dostoevsky and is just as Russian as the day is long. It's the howl of the whole universe. So the world's beautiful but broken, and then we're kind of torn between these two things. Well, what does art do, right? Whether it's theatrical art, which we'll be exploring a bit with the Millers, or graphic art, or anything we do that is along those lines. Well, here's what Bulgakov says, and if you know your philosophy back from college days, you'll know this sounds very Platonic, and that's not a surprise because the Greek Church, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, all those various national Orthodox churches, very much steeped in that way of looking at things. But there's some value to that way of looking at things, as I think emerges in this quote. He says, "Art sees not the outward, but the inward aspect of the object. It looks for the primordial idea of the object, an idea which is sometimes but slightly and dimly discernible through the outward covering." And this is one of the justifications for more abstract art, is you're not just trying to replicate the thing, you're trying to, at least according to Bulgakov, somehow capture its essence visually or in music or however that might play out. And he then, concluding quote we have here, says, "Things are transfigured and made luminous by beauty." So you exist, in other words, to be beautiful, not physically beautiful by human standards, which, just avert your eyes up here, because you think, well, if that's the standard, then you must be very ungodly indeed, which indeed I may be, but not by virtue of how I look, right? But you do want to live a beautiful life, and things in the world become what they are by being beautiful. Says they become the revelation of their own abstract meaning. And this revelation through beauty of the things of the earth is the work of art. The world, as it has been given to us, has remained, as it were, covered by an outward shell through which art penetrates, as if foreseeing the coming transfiguration of the world. And he uses that word transfiguration quite deliberately. Jesus on the mountain, who has been temporarily transformed from what he appears to be, and what in one sense he is, but you sort of see that divine glory radiating out of it. And so art, amongst other things it might do, helps capture that glory resident within creation and bring it out into an artifact so that we can really appreciate what God has intended it to be.
I'm Carmela Martin, and I am a visual artist, a painter. I try to remember when I'm painting, my sort of mantra is, by the power of your spirit to the glory of your name. And because I'm not looking at anything generally when I'm painting, and so it really is a question of having faith that God will produce something out of what I am trying to produce. Artists tend to like the phrase, trust the process. Abstract artists particularly like the phrase, trust the process. And for me, it's trusting God in the process, that something will come out of it that doesn't end up in the trash can.
My name is Jeff Miller, and I direct theater. The thing that I've enjoyed most about directing is it allows me to bring out the best in others. That's what I really love. When I can work with a student and help him, or an actor or a musician, bring out gifts that they have, nothing brings me more joy. I don't need to be in front. I love watching those people do their thing, because I really believe that's how God works and his spirit works.
I'm Ginny Williams. I'm an artist, and I opened an art gallery last year in downtown Wenham called Williams Fine Art Dealers, where I represent about 20 artists from all over the country. So I worked as an artist. Well, I studied art history in college and have done art all my life, and then worked as an artist professionally before I had children, and then less so, but still after I had children. And part of that, I went back to school to learn. I do representational, which is realistic painting. And I went back to a school to study that kind of painting in greater depth. And while I was there, I met tons of artists who are far better than I will ever be, struggling in anonymity, and afraid to really put themselves forward. And I thought, well, I have no problem putting you guys forward, because I know how hard it is, and I'll never be where you're at. And I'd always had it in my mind that someday I would start an art gallery. I have 3 small children, so I didn't really think it would be now. But a bunch of doors just kept opening, and I knew I had this great network of artists that I really was passionate about. When you can cheerlead these people and encourage them in their gifts, I just think that's God honoring in so many levels. Artists so often tie their worth to, you have a great sale or a good show and you're like, I'm awesome, and then you get rejected and you're down in the dumps. And so I love just being an encouragement and kind of like an even keel for a bunch of these artists, so they will continue doing what they're doing and not, throw away their paintbrushes for a couple years.
Have you struggled at times to find support within evangelicalism for the sort of thing you do? And if so, would you mind talking about that for a second?
I could talk about that for a long time, but I won't. I will say that it's perhaps the most difficult times I've had as an artist have not been from any kind of secular artist, but have been from the church. You say a certain word or portray a certain situation, and you get letters, you get calls. I've been called a demon. I've been said to be not saved because of certain things I put on. The verses from Philippians, whatsoever is good, pure, true, think on these things, have been thrown at me like a bludgeon. I'm mixing metaphors there, but hit over the head. I do believe in those things. I think we are called to think on those things, but by that standard, you can't read most of the Old Testament. And we have to remember what the context is. There's an appropriate context for being prophetic as an artist, which means calling to attention to that which is hollow, cheap, evil, wrong in our culture. And as artists, we are sometimes called to do that. That's harder, and it takes you into areas that are difficult. I think it's also a priestly function of an artist to hold up that which is good and valuable and worthy and say, think on these things as well. But the hardest thing has been people from the church, to be real honest with you. And that's always been a surprise to me, because my heart is wanting to serve the gospel and serve Christ and raise themes that are important.
How do you dare? That's my thing. I could never call myself an artist, and whether it was musically, whether it was creatively, or the written word, or whatever it may be. But where did you get that from?
When you see something that's more valuable and bigger than you, that's why you dare. And I think I got that in church. I think, when growing up in the church, I heard about David. I heard about Nathan, who had the tenacity to stand in front of David and say, you are that man, by telling a story. He was pointing to something bigger, and for me, that's the only thing that can make me dare. I just don't have it in me otherwise.
On the wall, coming into the gallery, I put up the quote from Ecclesiastes, whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might, which was best for the wall, but it was really, I was thinking of the verse in Colossians that says, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. And I just think that's what you have to keep in mind.